You wake up and you already know the day is going to be a battle. Before you even get out of bed, you feel that weight on your chest, that voice in your head saying you won't make it, that everything is too hard, that you're exhausted before you even begin. You look around and see people who wake up different. They get up, face the day, deal with the same problems you do, sometimes even worse, but something in them is fundamentally different. They have a strength you can't find inside yourself. And you ask yourself every single day, what's the secret? Why do some people seem to have been built to endure while you feel like you were assembled with defective parts? The answer is going to completely change how you understand your own mind. And it starts with a brutal truth that nobody wants to accept. Your mental strength isn't genetic. It's not luck. It's not personality. It's architecture. And architecture is built, not inherited. What separates a person who wakes up strong from one who wakes up broken isn't in the DNA. It's in what Henry Ford would call the manufacturing process. Your mind is a factory that's been assembled since the day you were born. And the problem isn't you. The problem is that your factory was built with the wrong tools, in the wrong environments, following the wrong manuals. Meanwhile, some people had their mental factories built under conditions that forged resilience into every neural circuit. And here's the part nobody told you. You can rebuild your factory, but first, you need to understand exactly what went wrong in the original construction. Let's talk about neuroplasticity, but without the academic jargon that turns science into useless poetry. Your brain is plastic, moldable, reconfigurable. From the moment you're born until approximately 25 years old, it's in intensive construction mode. Every experience, every challenge, every moment of pain or pleasure is literally sculpting the circuits that will determine how you respond to the world. Think of it like Ford's assembly line. You're not born with a finished car. You're born with the parts. The environment determines how those parts are assembled. A child who grows up in an environment where challenges are inevitable, where comfort isn't always available, where they need to develop strategies to deal with frustration, is building neural circuits of resilience. Every time they face something difficult and survive, the brain registers, I can do this, and it builds more architecture to support that truth. Now compare that with a child who grows up in an environment where all discomfort is immediately removed, where parents anticipate every need, where there's no space for frustration, where boredom is treated as an emergency. That child is building different circuits. Their brain is learning. Discomfort is abnormal. I need external help to regulate my emotions. I can't trust my own capacity. It's not their fault. It's not a lack of character. It's simply how factories work. If you teach a factory to produce one type of car, it can't switch products without complete reconfiguration of the assembly line. And that's exactly what many people need to do with their minds. Reconfigure the assembly line that was installed in childhood. Here's where it gets interesting. There's a structure in your brain called the amygdala. It's your alarm system, your threat detector, your front line in the battle for survival. In people who grew up in high-friction environments where challenge was constant but manageable, the amygdala learned to calibrate threats with precision. It knows how to differentiate between real danger and temporary discomfort. It doesn't fire false alarms all the time, but in people who grew up in low-friction environments, where all discomfort was removed before it could be processed, the amygdala never learned that calibration. It treats a difficult conversation with the same level of alarm it would treat a lion running in your direction. And you know what it's like to live with a miscalibrated amygdala? It's waking up already feeling like you're in danger. It's feeling your heart race before a normal meeting. It's interpreting every social interaction as potential humiliation. It's not weakness, it's factory miscalibration. And there's more. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for planning, impulse control, decision-making, is also sculpted by experience. A person who had to develop strategies to deal with frustration from an early age has a prefrontal cortex that was strengthened through constant use. It's like a muscle that's been trained. Every time you face something difficult, make a decision under pressure, resist an immediate impulse, you're strengthening that muscle. But if you never had to do that because someone always solved problems for you, your prefrontal cortex is underdeveloped. And when life inevitably puts you in difficult situations, you simply don't have the neural musculature to handle it. Again, it's not your fault. It's architecture. Henry Ford once said, "Quality means doing it right when no one is looking." But before doing it right, you need to have been trained to do it. And training in resilience doesn't happen in comfortable environments. It happens in environments of controlled friction. The Stoics understood this 2,000 years ago. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, wrote his meditations while commanding armies on battlefields. Epictetus, another great Stoic, was a slave before becoming a philosopher. They didn't develop mental strength despite difficulties, but because of them. Friction wasn't an obstacle to growth. It was the very mechanism of growth. And this isn't romanticizing suffering. It's understanding how biological systems work. You don't build muscles without resistance. You don't develop immunity without controlled exposure to pathogens. And you don't build mental resilience without controlled exposure to challenges. Here's the fundamental problem of modern society, and pay attention because this is going to explain exactly why you wake up broken while others wake up strong. We've created the lowest friction environment in human history. Each generation has fewer genuine challenges than the previous one. Food is a click away. Entertainment is infinite and immediate. Comfort is the default setting. And in theory, this should make us happier, stronger, more capable. But in practice, it's creating entire generations of people with miscalibrated amygdalas and underdeveloped prefrontal cortexes. Because you can't cheat biology. You can't create strength without resistance. And when you remove all resistance from the environment, you're not creating peace. You're creating fragility. Let me stop here for a second and ask a question that maybe nobody's ever asked you. When you wake up feeling that weight, that lack of strength, what's the first thought that comes to your mind? Is it something like, "I'm weak, I can't do this, I wasn't made for this"? Write in the comments. I want to know. Because what you're feeling is more common than you imagine. Thousands of people wake up every day with this same feeling, carrying the same weight. And the first step to rebuilding your mental factory is understanding that you're not alone in this. It can be something simple like, "My first thought is that the day will be too heavy," or "My first thought is that I won't make it." Your honesty can make someone feel less alone today. Now let me continue showing you exactly how you can rebuild this architecture. The good news, the news that changes everything, is that neuroplasticity doesn't have an expiration date. Your brain remains moldable until the day you die. The initial factory construction determined a lot, yes, but it didn't determine everything. You can install new equipment, you can reconfigure assembly lines, you can train your amygdala to calibrate better, you can strengthen your prefrontal cortex, but it's not going to happen by osmosis. It's not going to happen by reading motivational quotes on Instagram. It's going to happen through systematic and intentional exposure to the same types of friction you should have faced in childhood. And this isn't punishment, it's reconstruction. The Stoics had an exercise called premeditatio malorum, which means premeditation of evils. Every day, they imagined the worst things that could happen: losing everything, being betrayed, getting sick, dying. And the first modern reaction to this is, "Isn't that morbid? Won't that make me more anxious?" No. And here's why. Your amygdala fires alarms because it doesn't know how to deal with uncertainty. Uncertainty is perceived as threat. So when you systematically imagine worst-case scenarios and mentally rehearse how you'd handle them, you're teaching your amygdala that you can cope. You're calibrating the alarm system. You're showing your brain, "Look, even in the worst possible scenario, I have a plan, I have resources, I survive." And when your brain believes that, it stops treating every normal situation as a life or death emergency. Here's the protocol, and pay attention because this is the difference between understanding intellectually and implementing concretely. Every day, preferably in the morning, you're going to spend 5 minutes doing premeditatio malorum. It's not vague daydreaming, it's a specific exercise. You choose an area of your life. It can be work, it can be relationships, it can be health. And you ask yourself, what's the worst thing that could happen here? And then, critically, you don't stop at the fear. You continue. If this happened, what would I do? What resources do I have? How would I adapt? You're training your brain to see that even in extreme scenarios, you're not powerless. And this isn't pessimism, it's preparation. It's mental quality control. It's you taking your amygdala by the hand and saying, let's train together. Let's learn to calibrate better. The second exercise comes from another Stoic concept, the dichotomy of control. Epictetus said, some things are within our control, others are not. Within our control are our opinions, aspirations, desires, aversions. Outside our control is everything else. And he said, if you confuse what's inside and outside your control, you'll live in constant suffering. Now translate that to factory language. You have limited resources, limited energy, limited attention. If you're spending those resources trying to control things outside your control, your factory is producing waste. You're throwing energy into the void, and at the end of the day, you feel exhausted not because you worked hard, but because you worked on problems that had no solution in your hands. The protocol here is simple, but brutal in its honesty. Every time you feel anxiety, frustration, anger, you stop and ask, this thing I'm trying to control, is it really under my control? Traffic isn't. Other people's opinions about you aren't. What your boss is going to decide isn't. What's under your control? Your response, your effort, your choice of how to interpret the situation. And when you systematically redirect your energy only to what's under your control, something magical happens. You stop feeling powerless, because you stop fighting impossible battles. You concentrate all your strength on territories where you actually have power. And your factory stops producing anxiety and starts producing effectiveness. Now, the third protocol is the hardest. But it's what separates people who understand Stoicism from people who live Stoicism. It's called amor fati, love of fate. Marcus Aurelius wrote, do not wish for things to happen as you want them to, but rather wish for them to happen as they do happen, and you will be happy. And the instinctive reaction to this is, that's resignation. That's accepting mediocrity. That's giving up. No, it's exactly the opposite. It's the recognition that resisting reality is the source of all unnecessary suffering. Let me explain in terms Henry Ford would understand. Imagine you're in a factory and a machine breaks. You have two options. Option 1, get angry at the machine, complain that it shouldn't have broken, spend emotional energy wishing reality were different. Option 2, accept that the machine broke because it broke, and immediately direct all your energy to fixing or replacing it. Which of these approaches is more efficient? Amor fati isn't accepting everything passively. It's accepting reality as a starting point, not as a destination. It's saying, okay, this happened. It doesn't matter if I wanted it or not. Now what do I do with it? And when you develop this capacity to accept quickly and act immediately, you save an absurd amount of mental energy. You stop fighting with reality and start working with it. And this is what strong people do differently. They don't get stuck in the denial phase, in the why did this happen to me phase, in the this isn't fair phase. They jump straight to, okay, now what? And this capacity, this speed of acceptance, followed by action, is trainable. It's not personality, it's protocol. The amor fati protocol works like this. When something bad happens, something you didn't want, something that frustrates you, you do a mental exercise in 3 steps. First, you recognize reality without judgment. You literally say to yourself, this happened. Second, you look for something, anything, that could be useful in this situation. It could be a lesson, it could be a disguised opportunity, it could be just the chance to practice resilience. Third, you act. You take what you have and do the best possible with it. And over time, with repetition, your brain stops seeing obstacles as tragedies and starts seeing them as raw material. Problems become inputs to your factory, not production failures. And this shift in perspective, this neural reprogramming, is what builds genuine strength. Now, there's one last component we need to talk about, and it's probably the most important. It's about systems versus motivation. Henry Ford didn't build an automotive empire waiting to be motivated every day. He built systems that worked regardless of how he felt. And this is crucial because here's where most people get it completely wrong. They think strong people are always motivated, always energetic, always wanting to face challenges. They're not. The difference is that strong people built systems that work even when they don't want to work. They have routines, protocols, structures that carry them on bad days. And you need that. You need a mental assembly line that keeps running even when you wake up broken. Here's how you build it. First, you identify the non-negotiables. What are the 3 or 4 things that, if you do them every day, will keep your mental factory running at minimum acceptable levels? It could be physical exercise. It could be meditation. It could be writing for 10 minutes. It could be simply leaving the house. The important thing is that they're few, they're specific, and they're possible even on your worst day. I'm not talking about a list of 10 perfect habits that will transform your life. I'm talking about 2-3 items that are so basic you can do them even when you're destroyed. Because the goal isn't excellence, it's continuity. It's keeping the factory running. And when you do this consistently, something interesting happens. On good days, you do beyond the minimum. But on bad days, you have the minimum. And the minimum is what keeps you alive until the next good day. Second, you remove unnecessary decisions. Every decision you make during the day spends energy from your prefrontal cortex. And if you wake up with limited mental energy, you can't waste it on irrelevant decisions. So you automate. You eat the same thing for breakfast. You exercise at the same time. You follow the same sequence of activities. Not because you're a robot, but because you're being smart with limited resources. Ford did this in production. Every step of the assembly line was optimized to eliminate waste. You do this with your life. Every decision you can automate is energy saved for things that really matter. Third, you build redundancies. In engineering, redundancy is having backups. If one system fails, another takes over. You need this mentally. If you depend on a single thing to feel good, you're one bad day away from collapse. So you build multiple sources of stability. You have your physical routine, you have your mental practices, you have your social connections, you have your projects. If one fails, the others hold you up. And this isn't paranoia. It's intelligent design. It's recognizing that bad days will happen, energy will fluctuate, motivation will disappear, and you need a structure that can withstand these variations without completely collapsing. But here's the part nobody tells you about rebuilding mental strength. It's going to hurt. It's going to be uncomfortable. There will be days when you'll question if it's worth it, because you're literally reconfiguring neural circuits that were established decades ago. You're teaching a hypersensitive amygdala to calm down. You're strengthening a prefrontal cortex that was never adequately trained. You're building tolerance to discomfort in a system that was programmed to avoid it at all costs. And this doesn't happen smoothly. Neuroplasticity isn't magic, it's work. It's like renovating a factory while it's operating. You can't just shut everything down, rebuild, and turn it back on. You have to make incremental changes while keeping basic operations running. And it's exhausting. And it's frustrating. And there are days when you'll feel like you're not making progress. But here's what you need to understand. Progress in mental reconstruction isn't linear. It's not a little better every day. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, long plateaus where nothing seems to change, and then suddenly a leap. That's how neuroplasticity works. You're practicing, and it seems like nothing's changing. And then one day you realize that situation that used to destroy you is now just uncomfortable. And a few weeks later, you realize it's now just annoying. And eventually, it's just something that happened. Your system has been recalibrated, your factory has been reconfigured, but you only get there if you keep operating during the periods where it seems like nothing's changing. And here's the most important thing I can tell you. The difference between people who wake up strong and people who wake up broken isn't that some have problems and others don't. Everyone has problems. Everyone faces challenges. Everyone has bad days. The difference is in the mental architecture that processes those problems. An architecture can be rebuilt. You're not stuck with the factory version that was installed in your childhood. You can install new systems, you can upgrade equipment, you can reconfigure processes, but you need to accept that this is a long-term project. It's not a weekend workshop, it's not a 30-day course, it's a years-long commitment to systematic and intentional reconstruction, and it's worth every second. Because the alternative is waking up broken for the rest of your life. So let's summarize what you need to do, starting tomorrow morning. First, 5 minutes of premeditatio malorum. You choose an area of life, imagine the worst scenario, and mentally rehearse how you'd handle it. You're training your amygdala. Second, throughout the day, every time you feel anxiety or frustration, you stop and ask, is this under my control? If it's not, you redirect energy. If it is, you act. You're optimizing resource use. Third, when something bad happens, you practice amor fati, recognize reality, look for utility, act. You're building recovery speed. And underneath all of this, you maintain your non-negotiables, the 2 or 3 things you do every day no matter what happens. You're building operational continuity, and this won't turn you into a superhuman. It won't eliminate bad days, it won't make problems disappear, but it will do something more important. It will give you the feeling that you're not at the mercy of your own mind. It will give you the feeling that you have some control over how you respond to the world. And that feeling, that small shift from powerlessness to agency, is the foundation of all real mental strength. Because mental strength isn't never feeling fear. It's not never feeling doubt. It's not waking up every day exploding with confidence. It's having protocols that work when you're afraid. It's having systems that carry you when you're in doubt. It's having a mental factory that keeps producing even when you don't want to produce. And that is built brick by brick, circuit by circuit, day by day. So next time you wake up broken while watching other people wake up strong, remember this. They weren't born that way. Either they were lucky enough to have their factories built in high-friction environments, or they did the work to rebuild. And you can do the same. It won't be fast, it won't be easy, but it will be possible. And that, in the end, is all you need. Possibility. The rest is execution. And execution is just this, taking the next small step, and the next, and the next, until one day you wake up and realize you're a little stronger, and then a little more. And eventually you become the person others look at and think, how does she do it? And the answer is always the same. System, protocol, architecture, not magic, engineering. If you made it this far, I already know one thing about you. You don't just want to survive your days, you want to build something different. You want to wake up strong. And that tells me you're exactly the kind of person who belongs in this community. This channel isn't about magical promises or instant transformations. It's about real people using real tools that work in the real world. Every week, I bring a new perspective on how your mind works, and more importantly, how you can work with it, not against it. If that makes sense to you, subscribe to the channel. Not because I'm asking, but because you deserve to have a place where you can learn to rebuild your mental factory the right way. The next video is ready, and it will show you exactly how to deal with the biggest saboteur of mental strength, the internal dialogue that destroys you before the day even begins.